Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Continuing to talk about some of these programs that can win a national championship in 2023. And we're talking the Ohio State Buckeyes. You look at this team on paper, and it is loaded to the gills with talent. It's a team that certainly can win a national championship. We're going to be talking about some reasons why they can win a national championship, and then the questions of like what needs to come together for this program in order to win that national championship in 2023. Now, before we get into it again, just want to say shout out you guys and just all the support you guys have shown the channel. We've talked a ton of Ohio State recruiting the last couple of weeks. Very hot on the trail, so you guys have been awesome with the support. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, can't tell you guys how much the support means to the boys. We appreciate you rocking with us. And Dell, let's get into it. And I want to start on the defensive side of the ball here. I don't have many questions. You obviously have some quarterback questions on the offensive side of the ball, but this defense, you look at this roster and the depth and the talent that they have. Dylan, my first reason, Jim Knowles, year 2. What are you thinking here?
I will say, I think, like, if you only watch the Michigan and Georgia games, like the 2 games they lost, obviously, you come away with a much different perception of what this Jim Knowles defense was. I mean, for most of the season, they were nails. They really didn't give an inch. They were really, really good. And then in those 2 games, they had some horrible, horrible breakdowns in very inopportune moments. But even throughout most of those games themselves, Ohio State was playing really good defense. So This defense, for the most part, was really good. But it's going to be about limiting the mistakes. And that's what Ryan Day's talked about all year. That's what I know Jim Knowles knows can't happen again, and he's going to have to fix. But man to man, like, that's a really good defense. And it has
on paper, this defense is loaded. And Jim, the thing with Jim Knowles and why I'm optimistic if you're an Ohio State fan on why this defense gets better year 2, like, remember Michigan when they went with Mike McDonald going from Don Brown? Like, it was a lot of man coverage, the same scheme for years and years. And then you go and kind of play this defense that has multiple different looks, multiple different coverage packages. And the Michigan defense, it took a little bit to adjust to that. Jim Knowles, it's a very similar circumstance. Like, this Jim Knowles defense is extremely complicated. A lot of different fronts, a lot of different coverages, very different than what Kerry Combs was running with Ohio State before that. So if you're an Ohio State fan, I think you're feeling really good about a lot of these guys who were in this system last year coming into year 2 and it being just a smoother transition in terms of
just not making mistakes. Because, again, if they don't make mistakes, they're as good of a defense as anyone in the country, possibly. I mean, maybe not quite as good as, like, Georgia at the best, but they're right up there. They were really, really good.
Take, 5 plays away from that Michigan game, and Michigan might have had 180 yards of offense. I mean, but the thing is,
together like 2 drives, I feel like, in the whole game, and then everything else was just big plays.
Yeah, and some of it was coverage breakdowns, and some of it just was. I mean, that stuff happens, but it's hard to win those big football games against the Georgia, against the Michigan, when you're giving up those big plays. So I'm looking for that Ohio State defense to just look more comfortable in year 2 under Jim Knowles' defense, because hey, Jim Knowles is one of the best defensive coordinators in the game. Like, he's shown that. If they can put it together in terms of understanding that defense, you're feeling really good about what this Ohio State defense is. And the second reason is I think this could be an elite pass rush for Ohio State.
This might be throwback to those scary Chase Young, Bosa-led defensive lines where it was you drop back and they're on you in a second. You got 2 of the best in the country doing it with JT and Jack Sawyer.
And JT and Jack Sawyer are the headline guys, and JT, I think, is truly special. What's also really intriguing is the depth they have throughout the whole defensive line. Like Michael Hall Jr., you're talking about probably the best pure pass rusher from the inside that we'll see in college football this year. A guy like Ty Hamilton, then you go get Tywan Malone from Ole Miss. So the depth is there, especially on the inside. And then you're talking about some guys who, like, if Jack Sawyer and JT aren't on this team, like, they're starting on most teams. Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, Amari Arbor, like those guys are legit studs. If you watch the spring game, they were dogging Ohio State's offense.
Kenyatta Jackson, he feels like the X factor to me. Like, he's just going to put together a monster year, and we're going to be like, oh, well, another top 5 defensive end from Ohio State, because you even kind of hear the rumblings from the camp. You saw it in the spring game at times. Like this guy is obviously wildly talented. And again, Larry Johnson does a really excellent job with these defensive ends. So I'm kind of looking for him again. It's led by JT and Jack Sawyer. Those two are the guys this year. But man, if Kenyatta Jackson can step up and be a monster too, like I don't even know what you do with this.
Like everything you want in a pass rusher. He was building a lab, honestly, kind of like Zach Harrison in a way. Zach Harrison, I think a lot of Ohio State fans would probably agree, left a little bit of meat on the bone in terms of his Ohio State career. But Kenyatta Jackson, like if he puts it together, you're looking at like three guys who could be All-American pass rushers, which is absolutely insane. Now, if there is, and I guess one thing I want to know before we move on to the next part is like having depth at that defensive line is something that I've kind of like started to think is just so important. Like if you can, like, why is Georgia's defense so good? Yes, they have first round talent on that defensive line, but they also go 3 units deep of guys that just can get after it. So you can get a nice fresh bodies in consistently. I think that means a lot for a pass rush, especially when you're getting late in the season or late in games. Now, the one question mark, and I don't even know if it's a question mark. It's just, can the secondary, Dill, be as elite as it is on paper? Because you look at this roster and this depth chart, who they have in the secondary, legit studs. Can they put it together and be one of those elite secondaries that we see in college football?
And we've been talking. I feel like a lot of it is going to come down to, can Denzel Burke kind of find his form when he was at his peak in really dominating?
Yeah.
He's a first round corner if he plays that type of football. Again, we haven't necessarily seen it all the time over the past year and a half or so, but when he's really dialed in and playing great football, he's as good as it gets. And I think that would set the tone for this whole defense. And again, they're talented. I think obviously with what they did in the transfer portal is really going to help, especially with Igbenogson and Jihad Carter coming in and being kind of replacing some guys who had some moments of being not very dependable.
Yeah, Davison Igbenogson, he's another guy, kind of like we were talking about with Kenyatta Jackson, like pretty much checks all the boxes, like super long. He's got good speed, was a true freshman All-American last year at Ole Miss. That was a massive get for Ohio State, especially because it didn't let Michigan get another guy at that cornerback spot. Jihad Carter, though, I feel like doesn't get enough love. A lot of the talk has been around Denzel Burke, Davison Igbenogson. Jihad Carter is, in my mind, a perfect fit for what Jim Knowles wants to do. Like, you want to have that kind of nickel who walks into the box. You want to have speed, but also be able to stop the run. Jihad Carter, with everything Jim Knowles wants to do on the defensive side of the ball, I think fits that like defensive chess piece. And so you're looking at a really good, and then I mean you got 2 really dependable safeties and Lathan Ransom and Josh Proctor.
And then you possibly do have Sonny Styles taking one of those spots, because again, those 2 are solid players. Sonny Styles has a gear probably that neither of those can really reach. And again, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I want to see him play. I mean, who doesn't want to see the young stars play? I want to see CJ Hicks play. I know it's like kind of a crowded linebacker room, but man, those 2 guys, you look at them like those are first round talents. I think you want to see them on the field.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the linebackers because they ain't much question. I mean, you're looking
Tommy Eichenberg's like the best in the game. I think he's
Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers, Cody Simon. But you're right. Like CJ Hicks, he does bring an element of just different. Like he is truly special, and I think we're going to see him. He looked phenomenal in the spring game. Oh, yeah. I think we're going to see him play a decent amount. Now, we got to talk about, I mean, when you're talking about Ohio State and why they can win a national title, like it does start on the offensive side of the ball. We threw you guys a little curveball talking defense first, but though the offensive playmakers, and like Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, 2 of the best wide receivers in the country, arguably. The X factor for me, can Julian Fleming put it together? And I this is going to sound weird, but I'm kind of rooting for Julian Fleming. You would see a lot of guys in Julian Fleming's shoes transfer out of the program.
Oh, 100%.
Right. Top 10 national dude out of high school, has everything you need in a wide receiver, struggles with injuries, struggles with playing time, and he might even struggle with playing time this year with guys like Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis coming in. I give him all the credit in the world for sticking it out. And again, you're looking at if Julian Fleming can reach even 80% of his potential, Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, and Emeka Egbuka, is that like
that's a tough unit to stop. I mean, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the best wide receiver we've ever really seen in college football in like a long time. But I think you're right. Again, if Julian Fleming puts together, like, they're scary either way. I mean, just Harrison Jr. and Ibuka, like,
Just
that's a
Marvin
problem
Harrison
for
Jr.
everyone. But if Julian Fleming kind of, again, like, emerges to be the guy we think he can be, or at least Ohio State and the recruiters thought he could be, you got three guys. I just don't know what you do. It'll look like those days when they were playing, and it just felt like there were like 7 wide receivers because they were all so open.
Yeah, and the other piece to this that I don't think, I mean, you obviously give all the credit to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Buka, two guys who just dominated last year coming back, and Travion Henderson, like, I'm already kind of putting together some 2024 NFL draft stuff, and if he gets back to what he looked like as a true freshman, I mean, he is the best running back in the country. I thought he was just as good as Bijan coming into last year, and maybe Bijan was a little bit better, but Travion Henderson obviously struggled with that foot injury, and he looked different. I think Travion Henderson would tell you, yeah, I wasn't 100%, and that's why he didn't really play to end the year. But if Travion Henderson can get back to that true freshman form where he is just a different level of explosiveness, you're looking at the best wide receiver in the country, and you might be looking at one of the best running backs in the country too. And you combine that with the bowling ball of Mayan Williams, even this running back core is just absolutely loaded.
And that is just kind of touching on why that's so important is, again, you're breaking in a new quarterback. You do need to replace an absolute star in CJ Stroud, one of the better ones we've seen in college football in a long time. But this job is not an impossible job by any stretch of the imagination. Like, with all those weapons, one of those two quarterbacks, Brown or McCord, has to be talented enough to run this offense and be a 40 a game kind of unit, because there's too much talent for them to be.
I think I could come in and put up some numbers in this Ohio and I got a noodle arm. I don't think I could push the ball 20 yards down the field, and I think I could put up some numbers. It seems just hard for a quarterback not to succeed in this offense. And again, you want to have that CJ Stroud, that Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback that comes up big in the big moments. But whoever it is, Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, true freshman Lincoln Kienholz from South Dakota, you're looking at a quarterback that's going to have success, because it's just, quite frankly, going to be hard not to. Now, the one question you do have on the offensive side of the ball is that offensive tackle spot, and it's something I've had a conversation with some Ohio State fans when we're talking recruiting is, outside, like, after Paris Johnson, they haven't really won out on some of those elite offensive tackles coming out of high school. And I think you're seeing that kind of rear its ugly head a little bit this year, where we had to go late after spring practice and say, we got to address this tackle spot. You go out and get Josh Simmons, who a solid 4-star out of high school, was solid as a redshirt freshman at San Diego State. But that's probably the question that you have is, how are these tackles going to be able to hold up?
And that'll be it. And that'll be a big part of what they do. Because again, they are going to want to throw it. That's Ryan Day's DNA. And I know they have the ability to run the football effectively, but Ohio State's not Ohio State if they can't put the ball in the air. And again, you really don't know what you're going to have with these tackles. Again, Josh Simmons played decent football in the Mountain West, but had a lot of penalties.
That was a settle for sure. It was a settle in terms of, like, we're not, I wouldn't say desperate, but it's like, we got to get another body in here. That isn't, like, I don't think in a regular year, like, Davison Igbinosun's just like, that's a solid cornerback. We're going to add him and he's going to help our team. Josh Simmons, that move kind of seemed like it's we don't love what we have in this tackle group. We got to get someone like Josh Simmons.
I will say, Justin Fry is probably as good of an offensive line coach as this program's had in quite a few years. So that is like a missing piece. And again, you kind of heard Ryan Day after that first loss to Michigan. I mean, he was shaking things up, and there's new guys coming in. And I think the addition of Justin Fry will help them, because again, I think he is a better offensive line coach than they've had in a little while. I think that's why they brought him in. Is it's been a position that, as much talent as it's had, it hasn't been the dominant unit I think Ohio State wants. Like, you even go back to 21, that for as many guys as they were going to put in the pros, like that unit really didn't play good enough when they needed them to. And frankly, at times last year, it wasn't playing good enough. But you got to trust a little bit in what Justin Fry can do in that shakeup. Because again, I do think that was like that Jim Knowles type hire. It's like, we got to get a guy who can kind of revamp this unit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so hard. Like, you're replacing Paris Johnson, who was my offensive tackle one in the draft and one of the better tackles we've seen in college football, and DeJuan Jones on the other side. Now, there is some optimism. You are returning that interior offensive line is going to be great. Like, I mean, you lose Luke Weifler, but I mean, you talk about Donovan Jackson, Matthew Jones. Like, you won't find many offensive guards better than them. So if there is going to be some guys that maybe take some heat off the tackles, it could be a really strong interior offensive line unit. But that is probably the question mark you have about this offense is one, the quarterback play, which kind of gets mitigated with just the offensive weapons they have. But the second one is can you hold up? Can you protect the quarterback? And that's going to fall on this offensive tackle group. That'll do it. I mean, again, like if they figure out the tackle play, if this team plays like they are on paper, this is, again, they're going to compete for another national title. And you look back at last year, like they weren't that close from winning.
They were a kick away. I mean, they're a kick away.
They roll TCU if they beat Georgia. So going to be another good season for Ohio State. They're crushing it on the recruiting trail. Again, appreciate you guys checking the boys out. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.